A woman in faded blue scrubs sat alone in a military mess hall, eating powdered eggs off a metal tray like she had nowhere else to be. No rank insignia, no unit patch, no one talking to her, just a ghost occupying a chair. Then a Marine captain crossed the room, slammed his palm on her table, and told her she had 60 seconds to explain why she was on his base before he had her escorted out in handcuffs. She didn't look up. She didn't flinch. She just said 5 words that would eventually bring an entire command structure to its knees. You really should stop now. If this story satisfies your soul the way I think it will, hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. And make sure you follow along until the very end, because what happens to this captain, he never saw it coming. The mess hall at Camp Ridgemont smelled the way every military cafeteria in the country smelled. Burnt coffee, industrial cleaning solution, and whatever they decided to call Tuesday's lunch special. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting the kind of flat, sterile glow that made everyone look 10 years older and permanently exhausted. Long tables filled the room in tight rows, most of them occupied by Marines and desert utilities, their conversations blending into a low wall of noise that bounced off the concrete walls and metal ceiling panels. Emily Carter sat at the far end of a corner table, alone. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't skulking. She was just eating. A tray of scrambled eggs, a bread roll she hadn't touched, and a paper cup of black coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. Her scrubs were a washed-out shade of blue, the kind that had been through 100 laundry cycles and lost whatever brightness they'd started with. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, a few loose strands falling along the side of her face. No makeup, no jewelry except for a thin watch with a cracked face. She looked like what she appeared to be, a civilian nurse who had wandered into the wrong cafeteria. Nobody sat with her. Nobody acknowledged her. A few Marines at the next table had glanced over when she first walked in, dismissed her in half a second, and gone back to arguing about a football game. She didn't seem to mind. Across the hall, Captain Marcus Davis stood near the beverage station, filling a thermos with coffee while talking to a junior lieutenant about a training exercise scheduled for Thursday. Davis was 34, square-jawed, broad across the shoulders, the kind of officer who looked like he'd been assembled from a recruitment poster. His utilities were pressed sharp, his boots were regulation clean, and he carried himself with the particular brand of confidence that came from never having that confidence seriously challenged. He noticed her the way a dog notices a squirrel, an interruption in the pattern. "Who's that?" he asked the lieutenant. The lieutenant followed his gaze. "Not sure, sir. Might be one of the clinic staff." "Clinic staff eat at the clinic." Davis screwed the cap on his thermos. "She's not supposed to be in here." He didn't wait for a response. He was already walking. The conversations at the nearby tables didn't stop right away, but they dimmed. People noticed Davis moving with that particular stride, the one that meant someone was about to have a bad afternoon. A few Marines exchanged glances. One of them nudged his buddy and tilted his chin toward the corner table. Davis reached her in 8 steps. He didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of her table, thermos in one hand, the other resting on his belt, and looked down at her like she was a clerical error he needed to correct. "Ma'am." Emily glanced up. Her eyes were pale gray, calm, the kind of calm that could be mistaken for vacancy if you weren't paying attention. "Morning," she said. "This facility is restricted to active duty personnel and authorized contractors. Can I see your identification?" She set her fork down. "I'm with the medical rotation. Nurse practitioner. I was told I could eat here." "Told by who?" "Admin processing, when I checked in yesterday." Davis tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they've already decided you're lying and are just giving you the rope to hang yourself. "Admin processing doesn't authorize mess hall access for civilian medical staff. That goes through my office." He paused. "Which means nobody cleared you." Emily looked at him for a long moment, not with defiance, not with fear, with the kind of patience that comes from having been in rooms far worse than this one. "Then it sounds like there was a miscommunication," she said. "I can finish my breakfast and sort it out afterward." "No, ma'am. You can sort it out now." The tables within earshot had gone quiet. Forks stopped moving. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. The mess hall had that particular stillness that settles over a room when everyone realizes they're about to witness something uncomfortable and nobody wants to be the one to intervene. Emily picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "Captain, I've been on my feet for 14 hours. I sat down 20 minutes ago. I'm asking you, respectfully, to let me finish eating. And I'm telling you, respectfully, that you don't have authorization to be in this facility." His voice had gone up half a notch. Not shouting, but carrying, the kind of volume designed to make sure everyone in the room knew who was in charge. "If you can't produce valid credentials, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "I have credentials. They're in my bag at the clinic." "Then you should have brought them." She almost smiled. It was barely there, just a flicker at the corner of her mouth, gone before it fully formed. "You're right. I should have. My mistake." But she didn't stand up. Davis felt it, that tiny shift in the power dynamic, the moment when compliance should have happened and didn't. It crawled under his skin like a splinter. He'd handled situations like this 100 times. Civilian contractors who wandered into restricted zones, visiting officials who forgot their badges, lost delivery drivers who couldn't read signs. It was always the same script. He asserted authority, they complied, end of interaction. Clean and efficient. This woman wasn't following the script. "Ma'am, I need you to stand up and come with me to the security office. We'll verify your credentials there." "I'm not going to the security office, Captain." The words landed in the silence like a stone dropped into a still pond. Every Marine within 30 feet was watching now. A corporal at the next table had his phone out under the edge of the table, probably recording. Two sergeants near the door exchanged a look that said, "This is about to get ugly." Davis leaned forward slightly. That wasn't a request. Emily looked up at him. Her expression hadn't changed. Same flat calm, same steady gray eyes. But something in the air between them shifted. Later, several people in the room would describe it the same way. It was like watching someone reach for a light switch and accidentally touch a live wire. "Captain Davis," she said quietly, "you should stop now." He blinked. The use of his name, she'd read it off his uniform, obviously, but the way she said it carried something else. Not a threat, not a warning, more like the tone a surgeon uses right before they tell you the biopsy came back wrong. Davis didn't stop. "Are you refusing a direct order from a commissioned officer on a military installation?" His voice was fully raised now, parade ground volume, the kind that bounced off the walls and hit everyone in the sternum. "Because I can have MPs here in 2 minutes, and the paperwork that follows isn't going to be pleasant for you." Emily set both hands flat on the table. "I'm not refusing anything. I'm telling you that you're making an assumption based on what you see in front of you, and that assumption is going to cause you problems. The only problem I see is an unauthorized civilian in a restricted mess hall who thinks she can—" "Captain." A new voice cut through the room from 30 feet away, low, rough, carrying the particular gravel that only comes from decades of shouting over diesel engines and artillery fire. "Captain, stand down." Davis turned. Master Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Holt was 61 years old, built like a fire hydrant wrapped in leather, and had been in the Marine Corps longer than most of the people in this room had been alive. He was standing near the exit, one hand on the doorframe, staring at the corner table with an expression that Davis had never seen on his face before. It looked like fear, not the fear of danger. Holt had done 3 combat tours and carried shrapnel in his left hip from an IED outside Fallujah. This was a different kind of fear. The fear of recognition. The fear of realizing you've stumbled onto something that operates several levels above your clearance. "Gunny?" Davis said, thrown off by the interruption. "What?" "I said stand down." Holt's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 38 years in uniform had given it the weight of bedrock. "Step away from that table." "Gunny, this civilian doesn't have—" "Captain." Holt's eyes hadn't left Emily. "You need to stop talking, right now, and you need to step away from that table. Do you understand me?" The room had gone so quiet you could hear the ventilation system cycling through the ducts overhead. Davis stood there, caught between the authority of his rank and the undeniable force of Holt's tone. A captain outranks a master gunnery sergeant on paper. But paper doesn't mean much when the master gunnery sergeant has been doing this job since before you learned to shave. Davis took half a step back. Not because he agreed, because the situation had shifted out of his control, and he could feel it, the way you feel the ground change under your feet right before a sinkhole opens. Holt walked toward the table, slowly. His boots were heavy on the linoleum. He stopped 6 feet away from Emily, and his eyes dropped to the jacket draped over the back of her chair. It was olive drab, faded, civilian cut, the kind of thing you'd find at a surplus store. But on the left shoulder, half hidden by the fold of the fabric, there was a patch. It was small, barely 2 inches across, a gray wing over a red cross stitched onto a black background. No unit designation, no text, just the symbol. Holt stared at it for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at Emily's face. She met his gaze, and something passed between them. Not words, not a signal, just the kind of understanding that exists between people who have occupied the same terrible spaces and carry the same invisible weight. "Ma'am," Holt said softly, "that patch." She didn't answer. "I've only seen that patch one time in my career, Kandahar, 2009, on a medic's bag during a Casevac that went sideways. 12 wounded, 3 KIA. The extraction bird took ground fire on approach, and the pilot aborted. Everyone on the ground thought they were done." He paused. "Everyone except the medic." Emily's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. The medic took command after the ranking officer went down with a chest wound, called in a secondary extraction route, coordinated suppressive fire with a squad that was pinned 200 meters east, triaged 12 casualties in 11 minutes under active engagement, and held the position for 47 minutes until the second bird made it through. Holt's voice had gone rough at the edges. The medic was wounded twice during the extraction, refused evacuation until every single casualty was loaded. The last person on that helicopter was the medic. Davis was watching this exchange with the expression of a man who had just realized he was standing on train tracks and could hear something coming but couldn't see it yet. They never released the medic's name, Holt continued. Classified operation, classified personnel. But the people who were there, the ones who survived, they had a name for her. He stopped. Ghost Angel. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily said nothing. She picked up her coffee, took another sip, and set it back down. Her hand was steady. Holt's eyes were wet. He blinked it away fast, the way men who've spent their entire lives in uniform learn to blink things away. Then he turned and walked out of the mess hall without another word. He walked fast, faster than a man his age with shrapnel in his hip should walk, and pulled his phone from his pocket before he'd cleared the door. "Sir," he said into the phone, his voice cracking for the first time in as long as anyone could remember. "Sir, I need you to come to the mess hall, right now. No, sir, I can't explain over the phone. I need you here, because I think Ghost Angel is sitting at table 9 eating scrambled eggs, and Captain Davis is about 3 minutes from the worst mistake of his career." Back inside, Davis hadn't moved. The interruption from Holt had knocked him off balance, but he was already recalibrating. The story about Kandahar, the patch, the name, it was dramatic, sure. But Davis operated in a world of procedures and protocols, not campfire legends. He didn't know what Ghost Angel meant. He didn't know what the patch signified. What he knew was that an uncleared civilian was sitting in his mess hall, and a master gunnery sergeant, who should have known better, had just undermined his authority in front of 50 Marines. He straightened his uniform and turned back to Emily. "Ma'am, I don't know what Gunny Holt thinks he saw, but that doesn't change the fact that you're in a restricted area without proper clearance. We can do this the easy way, or—" "Captain." Emily's voice was quiet, but it cut through his sentence like a blade through paper. "I told you to stop. You chose not to. That's your prerogative." She looked at him directly, and for the first time something in her eyes changed. The vacancy was gone. The detachment was gone. What replaced it was something that Davis had never encountered but recognized instinctively the way prey recognizes a predator. It was command authority. Not the kind that comes from a commissioning ceremony or a leadership course at Quantico. The kind that gets forged in the worst moments a human being can experience. Moments where hesitation kills people and the wrong call means bodies come home in bags. "Sit down, Captain," she said. And Davis, Captain Marcus Davis, USMC, who had never in his professional life been told to sit down by a woman in scrubs eating powdered eggs, felt his knees soften. He didn't sit, but he didn't speak either. He just stood there, trapped in the amber of a moment he couldn't fully understand, while somewhere outside the mess hall doors, the sound of boots, many boots, moving fast, began to echo down the corridor. Emily heard them too. She picked up her bread roll, tore off a small piece, and put it in her mouth. "You might want to be standing at attention when that door opens," she said, chewing. "Just a suggestion." Davis turned toward the entrance. The boot steps were louder now. 4, maybe 5 people, moving with the kind of urgency that only accompanies high-ranking personnel in a hurry. Through the small window in the mess hall door, he could see shadows converging in the hallway. His stomach dropped. He didn't know why yet. He didn't know the name. He didn't know the patch. He didn't know about Kandahar, or the 47 minutes, or the 12 casualties, or the helicopter that almost didn't come back. He didn't know any of it, but his body knew. Something old and primal and buried deep beneath his training and his rank and his pressed uniform was screaming at him that he had walked up to the wrong table, picked a fight with the wrong person, and the consequences were about to walk through that door with stars on their shoulders. The handle turned. Emily took another sip of cold coffee and waited. The door swung open hard enough to slam against the interior wall, and Colonel Benjamin Tarrant walked into the mess hall like a man who had just been told his base was about to be audited by Congress and the Pentagon simultaneously. He was 52, trim, with iron gray hair clipped so short it looked painted onto his skull. Behind him came 2 majors, a lieutenant colonel and Master Gunnery Sergeant Holt, who looked like he'd just sprinted the length of the building. Every Marine in the room stood. Not because protocol demanded it. Tarrant wasn't the kind of commander who required formality in the mess hall. They stood because the energy he brought through that door was the kind that makes people rise to their feet on instinct, the way animals stand when they sense a storm coming. Tarrant's eyes swept the room once, then locked onto the corner table. Onto Emily. He crossed the floor in long strides, his boots echoing on linoleum, and every step brought a new layer of silence until the only sound left was the ventilation system and someone's fork clattering onto a tray because their hand had gone numb. Davis turned toward him, opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to justify what he'd been doing, and Tarrant walked right past him without a glance. He stopped 6 feet from Emily's table. She looked up at him with those calm gray eyes, chewing a piece of bread roll like this was any other Tuesday morning. "Lieutenant Carter," Terrence said. "Not ma'am. Not miss. Lieutenant." The word landed in the mess hall like a grenade with the pin pulled. Davis felt his throat close. Terrence came to attention. Full position of attention, heels together, shoulders back, spine straight, and brought his right hand up in a crisp salute. "It's an honor," he said. Emily swallowed her bread. She set the roll down, wiped her fingers on a napkin, and looked at Terrence with an expression that might have been amusement or exhaustion or both. "Colonel," she said, "you didn't need to do that." "Yes, ma'am, I did." She sighed, picked up her coffee, drained what was left, and stood. Slowly. The kind of slow that comes from joints that ache in the morning and a back that doesn't sit quite right anymore. When she was upright, she was 5'6" in worn-out sneakers, thin in the way people get when they forget to eat regularly, and she looked about as threatening as a substitute teacher. Terrence held his salute. Emily returned it. Casual, loose-wristed. The salute of someone who learned it a long time ago and stopped caring whether it looked regulation. Terrence dropped his hand. "Lieutenant, I had no idea you were on base. If I'd known—" "You wouldn't have known," Emily said. "I checked in under my civilian credentials. I'm here as a contractor, not active duty." "Contractor." Terrence repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you shouldn't be eating in a mess hall with questionable eggs and worse coffee when I've got a fully staffed officers' club half a mile from here. I like questionable eggs." She glanced past him toward the two majors standing near the door, both of whom were staring at her like she'd just stepped out of a history textbook. "And I didn't come here to be treated like a celebrity. I came here to work." Terrence's jaw worked for a second. He looked like he wanted to argue, thought better of it, and decided to address the elephant currently having a nervous breakdown in the corner of the room. He turned toward Davis. Captain Marcus Davis, who was still standing at the edge of the table, whose face had gone the particular shade of white that happens when all the blood evacuates to your core because your brain has just realized you're in serious trouble. "Captain," Terrence said. His voice had dropped 20 degrees. "Step into my office, now." Davis found his voice. It came out hoarse. "Sir, I can explain. I didn't ask for an explanation. I gave you an order. Sir, I was enforcing protocol. This woman, Lieutenant, she didn't have visible identification. She was in a restricted facility, and I was following procedure. Captain." Terrence's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees just from his tone. "If the next words out of your mouth aren't 'yes, sir,' you're going to be filing reports in a basement office in 29 Palms for the rest of your career. Do you understand me?" Davis's mouth closed, opened, closed again. "Yes, sir." "Good. Wait outside." Davis turned and walked toward the exit. His stride was stiff, mechanical, the walk of a man whose autopilot had taken over because his conscious mind was too busy screaming. He passed the two majors without making eye contact, pushed through the door, and disappeared into the hallway. The mess hall stayed silent. Terrence turned back to Emily. His expression softened. Not much, but enough. "Ma'am, I apologize. If I'd known you were coming through rotation, I would have made sure—" "Colonel!" Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "It's fine. He didn't know. Most people don't." "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's an explanation." She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair, slung it over one arm. "He saw a woman in scrubs with no rank and no ID, sitting somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, and he did what he thought was his job. He was wrong, but he wasn't malicious. Ma'am, he threatened to have you detained. People have threatened worse." Terrence looked at her for a long moment. The room was still frozen, 50 Marines holding their breath, watching this exchange like it was being streamed live. He seemed to realize it all at once. He turned toward the nearest table, where a staff sergeant and 3 corporals were sitting with forks halfway to their mouths. "Everyone not directly involved in this conversation," Terrence said. "Finish your meals and get back to your duties. This isn't a spectator sport." There was a sudden clatter of movement. Trays picked up, chairs scraping, boots shuffling toward the exit. Within 30 seconds, the mess hall had emptied by 2/3. The only people left were Terrence, Emily, the 2 majors, Holt, and a couple of stragglers near the kitchen who were pretending to refill coffee while clearly eavesdropping. Terrence waited until the noise died down, then looked back at Emily. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Why didn't you tell him who you were? You could have shut that whole thing down in 10 seconds. Emily smiled. It was small and tired and didn't reach her eyes. Because the second I use that story to get out of an uncomfortable situation, it stops being about what I did and starts being about who people think I am, and I'm not interested in being that person. You are that person. No, Colonel, I'm a nurse practitioner who did her job under bad circumstances, that's all." Terrence started to respond, stopped, and shook his head. "Lieutenant, with respect, that's not all. What you did in Kandahar was 15 years ago." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried an edge now, the kind of edge that cuts if you push against it. I'm not that person anymore. I'm older, I'm slower. I've got arthritis in my left knee, and I can't run a mile without my hip locking up. I work in a civilian clinic in Sacramento. I see patients with diabetes and high blood pressure, and I go home to a one-bedroom apartment with a cat that hates me. That's my life, not Kandahar. Terrence studied her. You're still carrying the patch. Emily glanced down at the jacket in her arms. The patch on the shoulder, gray wing, red cross, black background. She touched it once, lightly, with her thumb. Habit, she said. Or sentimentality. I haven't decided which. Holt, who had been standing silently near the door like a piece of furniture, finally spoke. Ma'am, the men from that operation, the ones who made it out, they still talk about you. I've heard the stories. I've heard them say they wouldn't be alive if you hadn't... Gunny. Emily's voice was quiet but absolute. I know you mean well. But I didn't save anyone. I was the last able-bodied person with medical training and a radio. I made calls. Some of them worked. That's all. That's all. She looked at Tarrant. Colonel, I appreciate the salute. I appreciate the recognition. But I'm here to do a job, and that job doesn't involve parades or officers' clubs or people treating me like I'm made of glass. Can we agree on that? Tarrant hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good. She pulled the jacket on, zipped it halfway. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a shift at the clinic in 40 minutes, and I'd like to grab a shower first. She walked toward the door, past Holt, who looked like he wanted to say something and couldn't find the words, past the two majors, who both straightened unconsciously as she went by, pushed through the exit, and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The mess hall stayed quiet for another 5 seconds. Then one of the majors, a thin man named Callahan with a logistics background and no combat deployments, turned to Tarrant and said, Sir, what the hell just happened? Tarrant rubbed his face with both hands. What happened, Major, is that Captain Davis just tried to throw a decorated combat veteran off this base because she didn't look the part. And now I have to decide what to do about it. Sir, Davis didn't know. That's the problem. Terrence's voice was flat. He didn't know because he didn't ask. He saw someone who didn't fit his mental picture of what belongs, and he made assumptions. And those assumptions nearly got him court-martialed. Holt spoke up from the doorway. Sir, if I may, Lieutenant Carter doesn't want this to be a big deal. It's already a big deal, Gunny. The question is how big I let it get. Tarrant looked at the two majors. Callahan, Reeves, I want every piece of documentation related to Lieutenant Carter's service record pulled and sent to my office. I want the after-action reports from Kandahar. I want witness statements. I want everything. Sir, a lot of that material is classified, Reeves said. Then get me the unclassified summaries and a list of what I need clearance for. I want it done by end of day. Yes, sir. Tarrant turned toward the exit. And someone find Captain Davis before he does something stupid like trying to file an incident report. Davis wasn't trying to file an incident report. He was sitting in a plastic chair outside Tarrant's office, staring at the opposite wall, trying to figure out how his morning had collapsed into a nightmare. His hands were shaking. He'd laced his fingers together to stop it, but that just made his forearms tremble instead. The hallway was empty except for a private first class delivering mail and a lieutenant walking past with a stack of folders. Neither of them looked at him. He wasn't sure if that was better or worse. He kept replaying the moment Tarrant had walked into the mess hall. The salute, the word lieutenant, the way everyone in the room had suddenly looked at Davis like he'd just kicked a puppy in front of a crowd. He didn't understand. He'd done everything by the book. The woman had no visible ID. She was in a restricted area. She'd refused to comply with a reasonable request. Everything he'd done was textbook. Enforce protocol, maintain order, escalate if necessary. That was his job. That was what they'd trained him to do. Except now his career was hanging by a thread because he'd enforced protocol on the wrong person. How was he supposed to know? She'd look like a nobody, like a civilian contractor who'd wandered into the wrong building, like someone who didn't belong. The door to Tarrant's office opened. The colonel stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. Inside, Captain. Davis stood, walked through the door, and stopped in the center of the room. Tarrant's office was sparse. Metal desk, filing cabinet, a single bookshelf filled with manuals and binders. The walls were blank except for a framed photograph of a Marine battalion and a map of Camp Ridgemont with colored pins marking training zones. Tarrant closed the door and walked around to the other side of his desk. He didn't sit. He stood there, hands resting on the back of his chair, and looked at Davis the way a mechanic looks at an engine that's making a noise it shouldn't. Do you know what you did wrong? Tarrant asked. Davis swallowed. Sir, I didn't know she was... That's not what I asked. I asked if you know what you did wrong. Davis opened his mouth, closed it. His brain was racing, trying to find the answer that would make this stop, that would let him walk out of this office with his career intact. Sir, I enforced protocol on someone I believed to be unauthorized. If I'd known she was military, you would have treated her differently. Yes, sir. Why? The question landed like a trap. Davis could feel it, could sense that whatever he said next was going to determine whether he walked out of this office or got buried under it. Sir, because military personnel have clearance, she wasn't in uniform. She had no rank. She looked like a civilian contractor. Sir, So you would have treated her differently because of who she is, not because of what she looked like. Is that correct? Davis hesitated. Yes, sir. Then you've just admitted that your enforcement of protocol is selective, that you apply rules based on assumptions about identity rather than consistent application of policy. Sir, that's exactly what you did, Captain. Terrence's voice was calm, clinical, the kind of calm that's worse than shouting. You saw a woman in scrubs, assumed she didn't belong, and when she didn't immediately comply with your demands, you escalated. You didn't verify her credentials. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check with admin. You saw someone who didn't look important, and you treated her accordingly. Davis felt his stomach twist. Sir, I made a mistake. You made several, but the mistake I care about isn't that you didn't recognize a decorated combat veteran. The mistake I care about is that you assumed someone's value based on their appearance and treated them as disposable when they didn't match your expectations. Sir, I didn't. You threatened to have her detained, Captain, in front of 50 Marines over a breakfast tray. The words hung in the air like smoke. Davis wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he'd been doing his job, that he'd been enforcing the rules, that he'd been trying to maintain order. But every justification died in his throat because he could hear how it sounded. He could hear the hollowness of it. Terrence sat down. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the desk. Do you know what Ghost Angel means? No, sir. It's the name the Marines in Kandahar gave to a Navy corpsman who took command of a failed Casavac operation after the ranking officer went down. 12 casualties. 3 KIA. The extraction bird took fire and aborted. Everyone on the ground thought they were done. Tarrant paused. The corpsman, who was a 24-year-old woman with 18 months of field experience, called in a secondary route, coordinated suppressive fire, triaged 12 wounded under active engagement, and held the position for 47 minutes until the second helicopter arrived. She was hit twice. Shrapnel in the shoulder and a bullet grazed across her ribs. She refused evacuation until every casualty was loaded. Davis felt the room tilt. The operation was classified, Tarrant continued. Her name was never released, but the people who were there, the ones who survived, they never forgot. They called her Ghost Angel because she appeared out of nowhere, saved their lives, and disappeared before anyone could thank her. Sir, I didn't. I know you didn't. That's the point. Tarrant leaned forward. You didn't know. And because you didn't know, you treated her like she was nobody, like she was an inconvenience, like she was someone you could bully into compliance because she didn't have the authority to push back. Davis wanted to argue, wanted to say that wasn't fair, wanted to explain that he couldn't have known, that it wasn't reasonable to expect him to recognize someone from a classified operation 15 years ago. But the words wouldn't come because somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the panic and the defensiveness, a small voice was whispering that Tarrant was right. He had seen a woman in scrubs and assumed she was nobody, and he'd treated her accordingly. Tarrant stood. You're relieved of duty pending an investigation. You'll report to Major Reeves at 0800 tomorrow for reassignment. Until then, you're confined to quarters. Do you understand? Davis's throat was dry. Sir. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Davis walked out of the office on legs that felt like they were made of wood. He made it halfway down the corridor before he had to stop and lean against the wall because his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't control them. Relieved of duty, investigation, reassignment. His career was over. He'd spent 8 years building it. Officer candidate school, leadership training, 3 deployments, 2 commendations. He'd done everything right. He'd followed the rules. He'd been a good Marine. And now it was gone because he'd confronted a woman in a mess hall. Except it wasn't just a woman. It was a decorated combat veteran who had saved 12 lives under fire while wounded. It was someone who had done things he couldn't imagine, survived situations he'd only read about in after-action reports, and earned a level of respect that no amount of rank or ribbons could replicate. And he treated her like trash. The realization hit him so hard he almost threw up. 3 hours later, Emily Carter was in exam room 2 of the base clinic, stitching up a lance corporal who'd managed to slice his hand open while doing maintenance on a Humvee. The kid was 19, skinny, nervous, and kept apologizing even though the injury wasn't his fault. A wrench had slipped and caught the edge of a jagged panel. Hold still, Emily said, guiding the needle through the skin with steady hands. You're doing fine. Sorry, ma'am. I know you've got better things to do than patch up stupid injuries. There's no such thing as a stupid injury. Just stupid decisions. You didn't make one. She tied off the stitch, snipped the thread. But next time, wear gloves. Yes, ma'am. She finished the last stitch, cleaned the wound, wrapped it in gauze, and gave him the standard speech about keeping it dry and watching for signs of infection. The kid nodded along, thanked her 3 times, and left looking relieved. Emily stripped off her gloves, tossed them in the bin, and washed her hands in the small sink mounted to the wall. The water was too cold and the soap smelled like industrial disinfectant, but she scrubbed thoroughly anyway. 30 seconds. The way she'd been trained. The clinic was quiet. Mid-afternoon lull. Most of the appointments were scheduled for morning or late evening when Marines could break away from training rotations. Right now it was just her, a physician assistant named Ortiz in the next room, and a receptionist up front who was probably scrolling through her phone. Emily dried her hands and checked the schedule on the computer. 2 more appointments before the end of her shift, both routine physicals. Easy. Boring. Exactly what she'd signed up for. She liked boring. Boring meant nobody was bleeding out. Boring meant nobody was screaming. Boring meant she could go through an entire day without having to make a decision that would haunt her for the next decade. The door to the exam room opened. She turned, expecting Ortiz or the receptionist. It was Colonel Tarrant. He stood in the doorway, still in uniform, looking uncomfortable in the way senior officers always look when they step into medical spaces, like they're not sure whether they're supposed to salute or fill out a form. "Colonel," Emily said, "if you're here for a physical, you need to make an appointment." "I'm not here for a physical." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine." "Ma'am, you were publicly confronted in a mess hall this morning by an officer who didn't know what he was dealing with. That's not nothing." Emily leaned against the exam table, arms folded. "Colonel, I've been confronted before, by people with guns. This was a man with a thermos and an attitude problem. I'll survive." Tarrant didn't smile. "Captain Davis has been relieved of duty pending investigation." She straightened slightly. "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, I did. He made a mistake. A bad one. But people make mistakes." "This wasn't a mistake, Lieutenant. This was a pattern. Davis has a history of complaints, mostly from civilian contractors and junior enlisted personnel, people who don't have the authority or the confidence to push back. This morning was just the first time he did it to someone who couldn't be intimidated." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. "What are you going to do with him?" "That depends on the investigation, but at minimum, he's getting reassigned and going through leadership retraining. If the complaints escalate, he could face formal charges." "Don't." The word was soft but firm. Tarrant frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, don't make an example out of him, Colonel. Not because of me. This isn't about you. This is about maintaining standards. It's always about maintaining standards until it becomes about punishment. And punishment doesn't fix the problem." She looked at him directly. "Davis didn't recognize me because nobody told him what to look for. He saw someone who didn't fit his idea of what belongs, and he reacted. That's not a character flaw. That's a training gap. Lieutenant, he threatened to have you detained. And if I'd been someone else, if I'd been an actual unauthorized civilian, he would have been right to do it." She paused. "The problem isn't that he enforced protocol. The problem is that he didn't verify first. And you can fix that with training. You can't fix it with punishment." Tarrant looked at her for a long moment. "You're giving him more grace than he deserves." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching people get destroyed because they didn't know better." She turned toward the sink, washed her hands again even though she'd already washed them, and didn't say anything else. Tarrant stood there, clearly debating whether to push the issue. Finally he said, "I'll take your recommendation under advisement." "That's all I'm asking." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "Lieutenant, for what it's worth, what you did in Kandahar, it mattered. It still matters." Emily didn't turn around. "Colonel, respectfully, what matters is the work I'm doing right now. The rest is just history." Tarrant left. Emily stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the small mirror mounted above it. Pale face, gray eyes, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 15 years ago. She looked tired. She always looked tired. She dried her hands and went to see her next patient. By the time her shift ended, the sun was low on the horizon, and the base had settled into the strange quiet that comes right before evening chow. Emily walked back to her temporary quarters, a small room in the transient barracks with a twin bed, a metal locker, and a window that overlooked the motor pool. She showered, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, and lay down on the bed with her phone. She had 3 missed calls, all from the same number, a Sacramento area code. She didn't call back. Instead, she opened a book she'd been trying to finish for the past 2 months, a thriller about a detective hunting a serial killer in the Pacific Northwest. She'd made it to chapter 12. The detective had just discovered that the killer was someone she trusted. Emily read 3 pages, lost interest, and set the book aside. Her knee was aching. The left one. The arthritis she'd mentioned to Tarrant wasn't a lie. She'd torn the meniscus during the Kandahar extraction, landed wrong coming off the helicopter ramp while carrying a litter. It had healed badly. She'd refused surgery because she didn't want to be sidelined for 6 months, and by the time she'd changed her mind, the damage was permanent. Now it ached when it rained, when she stood too long. When she thought about it, she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. 3 miles away, in a different set of barracks, Captain Marcus Davis sat on the edge of his bunk and stared at his phone. He'd drafted a message to Tarrant 4 times and deleted it 4 times. He'd started writing an apology to Emily Carter and couldn't finish it, because he didn't have her contact information and wasn't sure an apology would make anything better. He'd spent the afternoon replaying the scene in the mess hall, dissecting every word, every choice, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong, and the answer was obvious. It had gone wrong the moment he'd walked up to her table and decided she didn't belong. He'd looked at her and seen a problem to be solved. Not a person, not a veteran, not someone with a story, just a problem. And now he was paying for it. His phone buzzed. A message from Major Reeves. Report to my office, 800 tomorrow. Bring your service record. Davis set the phone down and put his head in his hands. Outside, the sky turned from orange to purple to black, and the base settled into the rhythm of another night. Somewhere in the transient barracks, Emily Carter lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Kandahar and helicopter rotors, and the sound a chest wound makes when you're trying to seal it with your bare hands because you've run out of supplies. And in a small office in the administration building, Colonel Benjamin Tarrant sat at his desk, reading through 15 years of service records, after-action reports, and witness statements, trying to understand how a woman who had saved 12 lives under fire had ended up eating powdered eggs alone in a mess hall while the people around her treated her like she was invisible. The answer, he was beginning to realize, wasn't in the files. It was in the mirror. The emergency sirens started at 0347 hours, ripping through the night like a chainsaw through sheet metal. Emily jerked awake, already reaching for her boots before her brain fully registered the sound. Years of deployment reflexes, muscle memory that never quite dies no matter how long you've been stateside. She was dressed and out the door in 90 seconds. The base had gone from dead quiet to controlled chaos, floodlights snapping on across the compound, voices shouting coordinates and unit designations, boots pounding on pavement in every direction. Emily stepped out of the transient barracks and nearly collided with a staff sergeant sprinting past, radio clutched in one hand. "What's happening?" she called after him. He didn't slow down. "Training accident at the range. Multiple casualties. All medical personnel report to the clinic." Emily was already running. The clinic was a quarter-mile away. She made it in under 3 minutes, her niece screaming at her the entire way, and pushed through the doors into a scene that yanked her 15 years into the past so hard she almost stumbled. Wounded Marines on gurneys, blood on the floor, someone yelling for O negative. The sharp chemical smell of disinfectant mixing with copper and sweat. Ortiz, the physician assistant, was at the center of it, triaging a lance corporal with a compound fracture in his right arm. He looked up when Emily came through the door, and the relief on his face was immediate. "Carter, thank Christ. We've got 6 incoming. Explosion during a live fire exercise. Shrapnel burns, possible internal injuries. One's critical." Emily stripped off her jacket, tossed it on a chair, and moved to the sink to scrub. "How far out is the medevac?" 20 minutes, maybe less." "What have we got to work with?" "Standard clinic supplies. No surgical suite, no ventilators, no blood products beyond what's in the fridge." Emily dried her hands and snapped on a pair of gloves. "Then we stabilize and keep them breathing until the bird gets here." "Who's critical?" "Martinez, corporal, 22 years old. Took shrapnel to the chest and abdomen. He's losing blood fast." "Where is he?" "Exam 3. Emily pushed through the door into exam room 3, and the smell hit her first. Blood. Lots of it. The kind of volume that means someone's running out of time. Corporal Luis Martinez was on the table, conscious but fading, his face the color of old newspaper. A compression bandage was wrapped around his torso, already soaked through. A Navy corpsman, couldn't have been older than 20, was holding pressure on the wound with both hands, his face pale and his movements jerky. Emily moved to the table. "Talk to me." The corpsman's voice shook. "Shrapnel to the left upper quadrant, entry wound below the ribs, no exit. He's got diminished breath sounds on the left side and his pressure's dropping. 80/50 when I last checked." Emily looked at Martinez. His eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated. Shock. Early stage but progressing. "Martinez, can you hear me?" "Yeah." His voice was a whisper. "Hurts." "I know. We're going to fix it. Stay with me." She pulled back the bandage. The wound was ugly. A ragged puncture just below the rib cage. Blood welling up dark and fast. She could see the edge of something metallic embedded in the tissue. The shrapnel had gone deep. Possibly nicked the spleen or the diaphragm. Possibly worse. Emily checked his pulse, thready, fast. His skin was cold and clammy. She looked at the corpsman. "Start a second IV, wide open, and get me a chest tube kit." "Ma'am, Now." The corpsman moved. Emily turned back to Martinez, kept her voice calm and level, even though her brain was already running through worst-case scenarios. Luis, I need you to keep breathing for me. Deep breaths, in and out. Can you do that? Trying. Good, keep trying. Ortiz appeared in the doorway. Carter, we've got another one coming in. Burns over 40% of his body. He's conscious, but put him in exam 2. Get the burn kit and start fluid resuscitation. I'll be there as soon as I stabilize Martinez. You need help in here? Not yet. Go. Ortiz disappeared. The corpsman came back with the IV kit and the chest tube supplies, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the bag. Emily took it from him, got the line started, and taped it down. Martinez's breathing was getting shallower. His lips were turning blue. Tension pneumothorax. The shrapnel had punctured his lung. Air was leaking into the chest cavity, collapsing the lung and putting pressure on his heart. If she didn't decompress it in the next 2 minutes, he'd code. Emily grabbed the chest tube kit, ripped it open. Hold him steady. The corpsman pressed down on Martinez's shoulders. Emily found the landmark, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line, and made the incision. Martinez gasped, tried to pull away. She worked fast, spreading the tissue, puncturing through the pleura. There was a hiss of escaping air, and Martinez's breathing immediately eased. She threaded the tube, secured it, connected it to the drainage system. His oxygen saturation ticked up. Not great, but better. Emily checked his vitals again. Pressure still dropping, he was bleeding internally, and there was nothing she could do about it here. He needed a surgeon. He needed an operating room. He needed things this clinic didn't have. How long until medevac? She asked. The corpsman checked his watch. 15 minutes. He's not going to make it 15 minutes. The words came out before she could stop them. The corpsman's face went white. Martinez's eyes found hers, and she saw the fear in them. The recognition that he was hearing his own death sentence. Emily grabbed his hand, squeezed it. Listen to me. You're going to make it, but I need you to fight. Do you understand? Martinez nodded. Barely. She turned to the corpsman. Get me every bag of oneg in this building, and find Colonel Tarrant. Tell him we need that helicopter here now, or we're going to lose this kid. The corpsman ran. Emily stayed at the table, one hand on Martinez's wrist, monitoring his pulse. It was getting weaker. The bleeding wasn't slowing. She'd done everything she could with what she had, and it wasn't enough. This was the part she hated. The part where training and skill hit the wall of reality, and all you could do was watch the clock and hope. Martinez's eyes started to close. Hey, Emily's voice was sharp. Stay awake, look at me. He forced his eyes open. Tell me something, anything. Where are you from? Texas? His voice was barely audible. San Antonio. You got family there. Mom, 2 sisters. They're going to see you again, I promise. It was a lie. She had no way of knowing whether he'd survive the next 10 minutes, let alone make it home. But sometimes a lie is the only thing standing between a person and the void. And she'd learned a long time ago that you tell the lie and you make it convincing. The door burst open. The corpsman was back, arms full of blood bags. Behind him, Colonel Tarrant appeared, still pulling on his jacket, his face tight. What do you need? Tarrant said. I need that helicopter on the ground in 5 minutes, or this Marine is going to bleed out on my table. Tarrant pulled out his radio. Air Ops, this is Tarrant. What's the status on that medevac? The radio crackled. Sir, Bird is 8 minutes out. They're coming as fast as they can. Not fast enough. Reroute them to the parade ground. It's closer to the clinic, and the LZ is clear. Sir, the parade ground isn't an authorized. I don't care. Get that bird on the ground, or I'm going to personally file charges against everyone in the chain of command. Do you copy? A pause. Yes, sir. Rerouting now. Tarrant lowered the radio and looked at Emily. Will he make it? I don't know. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't hedge. She just told him the truth, because that was all she had left to give. Tarrant moved closer to the table, looked down at Martinez. The kid's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow and labored. Tarrant reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. You hang in there, Marine. That's an order. Martinez's lips moved, but no sound came out. Emily worked through the next 6 minutes in a tunnel of pure focus. She hung the blood, adjusted the IV drip, monitored vitals, made 100 micro-adjustments to keep Martinez's body functioning long enough for the cavalry to arrive. The corpsman stayed with her, following orders without question, and she could feel his terror radiating off him like heat. He was too young for this, too inexperienced. But he didn't freeze, and he didn't run, and that was enough. The sound of rotor blades cut through the night. Close. Getting closer. That's our ride, Emily said. Get a gurney ready. We move him the second that bird touches down. The corpsman ran to grab the gurney. Tarrant stayed in the room, watching Emily work with an expression she couldn't read. She didn't have time to care. Martinez's pulse was barely palpable. His skin was gray. She was losing him. The helicopter landed with a roar that shook the building. Emily could hear the crew already moving, boots pounding toward the clinic entrance. She disconnected Martinez from the monitors, kept pressure on the wound with one hand, and helped the corpsman lift him onto the gurney. Go, fast. They pushed through the doors and out into the night. The helicopter was 50 yards away on the parade ground, rotors still spinning, side door open. A flight medic jumped out, ran toward them. Emily gave him the rundown in 10 seconds. Injury, interventions, current status. He didn't waste time with questions. He helped load Martinez into the bird, grabbed the IV bags, and climbed in after him. Emily stepped back. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up and the helicopter lifted off, nose dipping forward as it gained speed and altitude. She stood there in the wash of rotor downblast, watching the red taillights disappear into the black sky. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them, covered in blood, trembling like leaves in a storm, and she couldn't make them stop. The adrenaline was draining out of her system and leaving nothing but exhaustion and the cold realization that she'd just spent the last 20 minutes trying to save a kid's life with supplies meant for routine checkups. Tarrant was standing next to her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching the sky where the helicopter had vanished. Will he make it? Tarrant asked. If they get him to a trauma center in the next 30 minutes, maybe. Emily's voice was flat, empty. If not, no. Tarrant nodded slowly. Then he looked at her. You just saved that Marine's life. I bought him time. That's not the same thing. It's close enough. Emily turned and walked back toward the clinic. Her knee was on fire. Her back hurt. Her hands were still shaking and her scrubs were soaked with someone else's blood. She pushed through the doors and found Ortiz in exam 2, working on the burned patient. The Marine, a sergeant named Briggs, was conscious, his face and arms wrapped in temporary dressings, his eyes wide with pain and fear. How is he? Emily asked. Stable, for now, but he needs a burn unit. Medevac coming back? 15 minutes. Emily moved to the next exam room. Another casualty. This one had shrapnel in his leg, embedded deep in the quadriceps. She spent the next 10 minutes extracting it, irrigating the wound, closing it up. The Marine, a private first class named Kowalski, gritted his teeth through the whole thing and didn't make a sound. By the time the second medevac arrived, Emily had treated 4 more casualties. None of them were critical. Broken bones, lacerations, minor burns, the kind of injuries that hurt like hell but wouldn't kill you. She sent them off with the medevac crew and stood in the clinic lobby, staring at the blood on the floor. Ortiz appeared next to her, looking like he'd just run a marathon. That was insane. That was Tuesday, Emily said. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. Ortiz had figured it out. The calm under pressure, the precision, the way she'd moved through the chaos like she had a map no one else could see. Once or twice, Emily said. Ortiz looked like he wanted to ask more, but the door opened and Captain Marcus Davis walked in. He stopped when he saw Emily. Stopped cold, like he'd walked into a wall he hadn't known was there. His eyes went to the blood on her scrubs, the exhaustion on her face, the way she was standing with most of her weight on her right leg because her left knee had locked up. Lieutenant, he said. Emily looked at him. She didn't have the energy to be angry. She didn't have the energy for anything except the overwhelming need to sit down before her legs gave out. Captain, Davis's jaw worked like he was trying to find words and couldn't. Finally, he said, I heard what happened. The casualties. I wanted to... He stopped. Started again. I wanted to see if there was anything I could do. You can leave, Emily said. Not cruel, just tired. I've got it handled. Ma'am, He looked at the floor, at the blood, at anything except her face. I wanted to apologize for what happened in the mess hall. I was out of line. I made assumptions. I was wrong. Emily studied him. The guy looked like he hadn't slept. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes were red, and he had the kind of defeated posture that comes from realizing you've burned a bridge you didn't know you'd need. Apology noted, she said. Ma'am, I know that's not enough. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that He swallowed. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. And I'm sorry. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay. Okay? Okay? I heard you. You're sorry. I believe you. Now go do something useful. Davis blinked. Ma'am? There's a mop in the supply closet and about 2 gallons of blood on this floor. If you want to help, start there. He stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. Yes, ma'am. He turned and walked to the supply closet. Emily watched him go, then looked at Ortiz. I'm going to check on the other patients. Let me know if anything changes. Will do. Emily moved through the clinic, checking vitals, changing dressings, making sure everyone was stable. Her body was running on fumes, but her brain wouldn't shut off. That was the problem with adrenaline. It got you through the crisis and then left you stranded on the other side, too wired to rest and too exhausted to function. By the time she finished her rounds, it was nearly 600. The sun was starting to creep over the horizon, turning the sky from black to deep blue to pale gray. Emily stepped outside, sat down on the curb in front of the clinic, and let her head drop into her hands. She heard footsteps behind her. Tarrant. He sat down next to her without asking. For a while, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, watching the sky change colors, while the base slowly woke up around them. Martinez made it to the trauma center, Tarrant said. They got him into surgery. Prognosis is good. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Good. The flight medic said you saved his life, said if you hadn't stabilized him when you did, he wouldn't have survived the flight. I did my job. You did a hell of a lot more than that. Tarrant looked at her. Most people would have panicked. You didn't even blink. Emily didn't respond. She was too tired to explain that panic was a luxury you couldn't afford when someone's life was in your hands. That blinking meant missing something. That hesitation meant body bags. Tarrant seemed to understand without her saying it. He stood up, brushed off his uniform. Get some rest, Lieutenant. You've earned it. He walked away. Emily stayed on the curb watching the sun rise and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this tired. The answer was Kandahar. 47 minutes under fire, 12 casualties, 3 dead. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about it. Inside the clinic, Captain Marcus Davis finished mopping the floor. He'd been at it for 30 minutes, working slowly and methodically, scrubbing at the bloodstains until his hands ached and his back hurt. He didn't complain. He didn't stop. He just cleaned. When he was done, he put the mop away, washed his hands, and walked out into the morning light. He saw Emily sitting on the curb, her head in her hands, looking like she'd just carried the weight of the world and was still figuring out how to put it down. He thought about going over to her, thought about saying something, thought about trying to bridge the canyon he'd opened between them with his arrogance and his assumptions. Instead, he walked away. Some distances can't be crossed with words. 3 days later, Davis sat in Major Reeves's office, staring at a stack of papers on the desk. His reassignment orders, his new posting, his future, reduced to a series of forms and signatures. Reeves leaned back in his chair. You're being transferred to a training command in North Carolina. You'll be overseeing new officer orientation and leadership development. It's a 2-year rotation. Yes, sir. This isn't a punishment, Captain. This is an opportunity. You made a mistake, a serious one, but Colonel Tarrant believes you can learn from it. Davis looked up. The colonel said that? He did. He also said Lieutenant Carter recommended leniency. Davis felt something twist in his chest. She did? She told Colonel Tarrant that what happened in the mess hall was a training failure, not a character failure. She said you didn't know what you were looking at, and that's a problem we can fix. Reeves paused. She saved your career, Captain. You should probably thank her. Davis left the office with the reassignment orders in his hand and a weight in his chest that felt like it might never lift. He walked across the base, not really paying attention to where he was going, until he found himself standing outside the clinic. Emily was inside, visible through the window, talking to a patient. She looked calm, professional, unremarkable. And Davis realized, standing there on the sidewalk, that he'd spent his entire career learning how to identify rank and authority and command presence. But he'd never learned how to see the things that actually mattered. The quiet competence, the earned respect, the scars that don't show on the surface. He walked away before she could see him. That night, Emily got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Lieutenant Carter? A woman's voice. Young, shaky. Yes? This is Maria Martinez, Luis's sister. The hospital gave me your name. They said you're the one who saved my brother. Emily's throat tightened. How is he? He's going to be okay. The surgery went well. They said he'll make a full recovery. The woman's voice cracked. I just wanted to call and say thank you. The doctors told us that if you hadn't done what you did, he wouldn't have made it. Emily sat down on her bed, gripping the phone. I'm glad he's okay. Ma'am, I don't know how to repay you. I don't know what to say except thank you. You gave us our brother back. Emily closed her eyes. Take care of him. That's enough. They talked for a few more minutes. Maria asking questions, Emily giving careful, measured answers. And then the call ended. Emily set the phone down and sat in the silence of her temporary quarters, staring at the wall. She thought about Martinez on the table, his pulse fading, his eyes searching hers for some kind of reassurance she wasn't sure she could give. She thought about the helicopter lifting off into the night. She thought about all the times she'd stood in rooms like that, with lives hanging in the balance, and made calls that could go either way. She thought about Kandahar, and for the first time in years she let herself cry. Not because she was sad, not because she was scared, but because sometimes the weight of carrying people through the worst moments of their lives catches up with you when you're not expecting it, and all you can do is let it out before it crushes you. The next morning, Emily walked into the mess hall for breakfast. The room went quiet, not the hostile quiet from before. This was different. This was the quiet that happens when everyone in the room knows something they didn't know before, and that knowledge has changed the shape of the world. Emily walked to the serving line, filled her tray, and turned to find a seat. Every table had at least one open chair, and every Marine in the room was looking at her with something that hadn't been there before: respect. She sat down at the nearest table. Within seconds, a sergeant across from her said, "Ma'am, is it true you saved Corporal Martinez?" Emily looked at him. "I stabilized him. The surgeon saved him." "That's not what the flight medic said. He said you pulled off a miracle with nothing but a chest tube and a prayer." "I don't pray," Emily said. "I just do the job." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Well, ma'am, for what it's worth, thank you." Others echoed it. Quiet murmurs from around the table. "Thank you. Good work. We're glad you were here." Emily ate her breakfast in silence while the conversations around her resumed, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Ridgemont, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Across the room, standing near the doorway, Colonel Tarrant watched her with his arms folded. Next to him, Master Gunnery Sergeant Holt said quietly, "She doesn't want the attention." "I know," Tarrant said. "So why are you letting it happen?" "Because she deserves it, whether she wants it or not." Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what's going to happen if word gets out about who she really is?" "I know. They'll make her a symbol, a story, a recruiting poster. Everything she doesn't want." Tarrant nodded. "I know. So what are you going to do?" Tarrant watched Emily finish her breakfast, stand up, and carry her tray to the dish return. She moved through the room like she was trying not to disturb the air, like she wanted to disappear back into the background where she felt safe. "I'm going to make sure she has a choice," Tarrant said. But even as he said it, he knew the choice had already been made for her. Because 2 floors above them, in the base commander's office, a phone call was happening that would change everything. The phone call that was happening 2 floors above the mess hall involved 3 people: the base commander, a brigadier general named Whitmore, a Pentagon liaison named Stephanie Voss, and someone from Naval Personnel Command whose name didn't matter because they were just reading from a file. Whitmore had the phone on speaker. He stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, listening to Voss's voice crackle through the small speaker. "General, we've confirmed the identity. Emily Carter, former hospital corpsman, 2nd class, Navy. Service record includes 2 deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan. Recipient of the Navy Cross for actions during a CASEVAC operation in Kandahar, September 2009. The citation was classified at the time due to the nature of the mission, but it's been partially declassified as of last year." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "And nobody thought to flag this when she checked in as a contractor?" "Sir, she processed under her civilian credentials. No military ID, no mention of prior service. Technically, she didn't do anything wrong." "Technically." Whitmore let the word hang in the air like a bad smell. "So we've got a Navy Cross recipient eating eggs in a mess hall while one of my captains tries to throw her off the base, and nobody knew until a master gunny recognized a patch." "That's correct, sir." Whitmore sat down heavily. "How bad is this going to get?" "That depends on what you do next," Voss said. "If this stays internal, it's a teachable moment. If it goes public, it's a media firestorm. Decorated female combat veteran humiliated by male officer who didn't recognize her service. You can write the headlines yourself." "She doesn't want the attention." "Doesn't matter what she wants, General. Someone's going to talk. Someone always talks. And when they do, you'd better have a plan that doesn't make the Corps look like it forgot how to treat its heroes." Whitmore rubbed his temples. "What's your recommendation?" "Formal recognition. Public apology from Captain Davis. Maybe a ceremony. Give the story a happy ending before someone else writes a different version." "She'll hate that." "Probably. But it's better than the alternative." Whitmore ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he picked up his desk phone and dialed Colonel Tarrant's extension. Tarrant answered on the second ring. "Sir?" "My office, now, and bring Lieutenant Carter." Tarrant found Emily in the clinic, restocking supplies in exam room 2. She looked up when he walked in, saw the expression on his face, and set down the box of gauze she'd been holding. "What happened?" she asked. "The base commander wants to see you." "Why?" "Because someone at the Pentagon found out you're here, and now this has turned into a thing." Emily's face went blank. The same flat calm she'd worn in the mess hall when Davis had been standing over her, demanding ID. "I told you I didn't want this to be a thing." "I know. It's a thing anyway." She followed him across the base to the administration building, moving stiffly because her knee was still angry about the sprint she'd made 3 nights ago. They didn't talk. There was nothing to say. Both of them knew what was coming. Whitmore's office was on the 3rd